The bestowing of wings is a prestigious gift, Crowley knows. He had waited patiently, as flowers may wait for the spring, and watched 100 times, and 100 times still, as God had called upon her angels one by one to receive their blessing. They had left her company with smiles of diluted starlight, their rapture enough to set heaven ablaze from within. Crowley looked upon them as he fidgeted the hem of his shawl through rose-petal fingers, mouth agape like a trout pulled clear of the brine. It had never occurred to him that they had been built incomplete until he had seen an angel with her wings. Perfect, whole. Like Michael and her golden plumage, gilded with sun flares that would later thaw the falsities of Icarus. Or Gabriel, each feather emblazoned with a heart of amethyst, the colour of summer figs on the Isle of Skyros, passed between the lips of Achilles and his lover. And so his patience waned, growing brittle as sheepskin parchment, his longing desperate enough that he barely noticed her voice bidding him forward when the time came. She had led him to a place of reflection, the ground a shallow plain of water so pure it mirrored the expanse around it, an illusion of infinity within the infinite. She sat and pulled him in close as she worked, her hands moving in hypnotic patterns, picking at spools braided from solid moonlight. She coaxed the fibers as they bent and tightened between her fingers, stretching each one out like the strings of a lyre. Finally, she stopped to gaze upon her creation. "This is a gift," she had said, reaching out to smooth the gleaming feather into his palm. Crowley closed his fingers around it, as one might hold a bird, reveling in the softness of its touch. It was odd to think such a thing, beautiful as it may be, could ever truly be his. The ambrosia of curiosity lay thick as nectar on his tongue, tempting as forbidden fruit. But as the question stumbled to escape, God placed a finger to his lips. "From the moment you were gifted life, you have asked me many things. Today I wish to ask something of you." Crowley startled at the statement. Had he annoyed her? He was always running his foolish mouth. A day had not passed where his favourite words of who, why, and where were not summoned. But before he had a chance to churn the thought over his mind, God laughed. She had not intended it as a cruelty then. "Come," she whispered gently, tracing a finger down the hem of the universe, splitting the cosmos in two. Behind it, the whirling chaos of creation splintered the fabric of heaven, a kaleidoscope mass of colors and shapes, objects and places, sliding over each other, supple as smoke. "I ask only that you choose." She gestured to the feather, still cradled like a jewel in his grasp. "So that we may paint it, then it will know you, and be yours alone." Crowley blinked, overwhelmed by the gravity of his decision. The entire universe stretched out before him, all her creations gathered like high-strung pups lording for his attention. Finally, he pointed, pale fingers unfurling like a green shoot amongst the snowmelt, toward an expanse of star-speckled cosmos. Black as pitch, it stood a whiplash spectacle amongst the vibrant shades that clamoured to be chosen. After a moment's pause, God nodded. "An interesting choice." It was not in disapproval. Her voice still chimed with warmth, but it was contemplative. If he didn't know better, Crowley may have thought her surprised. "Was my choice not what you expected?" He turned to look at her, catching the hint of something unreadable, the quirk of a lip, the crinkle of eyes that had seen all that was, all that is, and all that shall be. You are the first out of all my children to choose that which may be feared. The night is not boastful, and its darkness shall hide many things. Men are fickle, afraid of what they cannot see. Are you sure this is what you desire?" Crowley frowned. He thought about the other angels and their gilded wings. They were the stuff of tapestries and myth. The mortals would carve them on their stone walls, obsessions illustrated in chalks and inks. Poets would weep at the sight of them, and kings, for all their fathomless riches, would grow bitter and green with envy. "No," he breathed after a moment, or an eon. Time was of no consequence to creatures such as he. "I should like to love that which shall be unloved." He reached out a hand, teasing ripples on the surface of the cosmos, letting the glimmer of 1,000 constellations slip between his fingers, the gold from which he would plate his soul. God smiled, and in the stagnated darkness of the universe, light broke. "Then it shall be done," she said. Crowley awoke, the softness of familiar thighs beneath him, the gentle pressure of Aziraphale's hand still cradled against his forehead. The angel's azure blue eyes were pinned shut, a slight crease to the bridge of his upturned nose. The air was perfumed with the scent of him, a mixture of cinnamon spice and leather-bound pages. The smell of the bookshop, the smell of home. Carefully, Crowley reached up to smooth a thumb over his lover's cheek, and Aziraphale hummed in pleasure. The demon would know him anywhere, the sound, scent, and touch of him. He would know him in the deepest gloom, the most blinding of light. And at the end of all things, when the world crumbled away and the stars collapsed from their cradle of heaven, he would recognize him still, even in dust. "Did you have a good dream, my dear?" Crowley smiled, bruising his bottom lip with his teeth, and chuckled as Aziraphale's cheeks pinkened at the sight. "It was a memory," he purred, stretching to plant a kiss to the angel's lips. Aziraphale leaned into the touch, but his face was tense, mouth crinkled at the edges like sun-cracked willow. Crowley simply sighed. He knew it was his lover's nature to fret, but he hated the worry in his eyes, the turbulent waves that stirred in the ocean of him. "It wasn't one of the bad ones," he flustered. "It was peaceful, I guess. The day I got my wings." "Ah," Aziraphale nodded, a loose grin splitting the current, soft as sea foam. "I remember my own ceremony. It was quite the occasion. The angel shifted suddenly, the warmth of his joy a spark snuffed out too quickly. The muscles of his thighs tensed beneath Crowley's back, a bracing gesture. The demon cocked an eyebrow. He recognized the seed of a question being planted, the blossoming on the lips. "Well, my dear," Aziraphale began. There was no need for the unspoken, for the soft eggshell knitting of words. Not with them. "I've always found myself wondering what your wings looked like before the fall." Crowley's mind finished solemnly. He felt a deep ache tug at his brimstone soul, an unending pain in the silk-spun fibers of him. He couldn't stand the gentleness, the sorrow in familiar eyes, sanctified by the blue fires of her grace. It was blasphemy for such emotion to be wasted on such a lowly thing as he. And yet Aziraphale didn't care. He never had. He had loved Crowley like the pull of binary stars. impossibly so. Beautiful as a forbidden miracle, rare as water turning into wine. Without a word, Crowley stood, a shiver passing through his shoulders as he unfurled the scorched feathers of his wings. They mantled above him in a crown of midnight black, casting shadows against the candlelit shelves. Aziraphale made no sound, no sneering jeer or horrified gasp at the tattered dregs of his divinity. Instead, he waited patiently for his lover's explanation. It's funny, you know. The other demons always assumed my wings were burnt this shade by the sulfur pools. It took a while for me to realize they simply couldn't see them as they are. Aziraphale frowned, lolling his head to one side. I don't quite understand. See what, my dear? Collateral beauty, Crowley murmured, but it was tinged with amusement, a secret known only to him. He offered his hand. The demon's fingers were long and pale, musician's fingers. Let me show you. Aziraphale took it without question. There was a sharp pull as their souls grappled for one another, rearranging inside their corporations. It was a dizzying experience, like a carousel spun too quickly. When the angel blinked again, Crowley stared back at him through a slip of tartan, a cherubic face of white hair and smiles as old as the earth itself. Look at them, he willed softly, the angel's gentle accent familiar on his tongue. Gingerly, Aziraphale obliged the watery command. It seemed to take him a moment for the sight to register, the brain to catch up with its newly acquired eyes. Aziraphale's lips parted, his fingers already reaching for the feathers at his back, but he dared not touch them. What do you see? Crowley asked, the question whispered in songbird syllables, a pale imitation of seraphim hymns. Aziraphale made a sound deep in the throat, but the words refused to surface. He looked splintered, cracked open, eyes glazed as they ogled at the hidden truth. Crowley's dark wings flexed in a canvas of swirling nebula, tiny pinpricks of light, sowing constellations amongst the inky veins of down. It was like gazing upon a stolen fragment of the cosmos, torn from the moon's grasp, to christen their master in a veil of walking starlight. How? Aziraphale breathed at last. He had paid no heed to the wetness on his face, flowing over the demon's angular cheekbones like rain over polished marble. Crowley nearly wept at the innocence of the question, so filled with love and wonder. He could feel the warmth of it radiating from the angel's soul, delicate as the dawn. It's the eyes, he murmured. She disguised my wings' true form in ultraviolet light. Perhaps it was nothing but a cruel joke, but sometimes I want to believe that she spared just enough of my grace to remain a faded memory, hidden to all but the unloved things, the serpents and the scorpions, the spiders, even me. Aziraphale turned, breaking his gaze from Crowley's wings for the first time. He seemed to look through him, taking in the soul beneath the skin, the consuming black hole pool of his ethereal self, gentle as gravity, alluring as first temptation. A moment later, the angel was bridging the shallow divide, the painful separation of 6,000 years between them. Aziraphale's mouth found Crowley's with crushing force, breathing warm air into his lungs, sweet and electrified, the ingredients of a summer storm. Later that night, tucked back in the safety of their own corporations, the angel's lips would find Crowley again, trailing kisses from skin to feather, sanctifying the light of stars unseen. He spoke to each as he did so, calling them by name. Beautiful, sacred, stunning. The demon purred as his fingers danced along the trails of their oily sheen, mapping out new constellations and hidden places yet to be explored. Seems you have a penchant for loving that which should be feared. Crowley grinned against the flush of a curved shoulder, shivering as the angel's hand brushed against the sensitive prickle of budding quills. Perhaps they too would blossom with the promise of new stars, sanctified by the warmth of an angel's touch. The sound of Aziraphale's joyous laughter was his only reply, as, in a realm far beyond the confines of London and its nightingales who sang of lovers' secrets, God smiled.
That certain night, the night we met, there was magic abroad in the air. There were angels dining at the Ritz, and a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm perfectly willing to swear that when you turned and smiled at me, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. The moon that lingered over London town, poor puzzled moon, he wore a frown. How could he know we two were so in love? The whole darn world seemed upside down. The streets of town were paved with stars. It was such a romantic affair. And as we kissed and said goodnight, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. When dawn came stealing up, all gold and blue, to interrupt our rendezvous, I still remember how you smiled and said, was that a dream, or was it true? Our homeward step was just as light as the tap dancing feet of a stair, and like an echo far away, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I know, 'cause I was there that night in Boston.